You sit in church week after week, embracing the truth of God's word. You believe the gospel and claim Jesus Christ as your Lord. Yet you continue to struggle with pornography. You feel like a hypocrite, returning to the sin you hate that mocks the God you love. You desperately wonder, is lasting freedom even possible? Yes, you can overcome pornography, but not alone. 2 Timothy 2:22 says, "Now flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. Only by repeatedly running from sin to Christ with other believers can you hope to enjoy lasting freedom." You can live with purity and integrity. Take courage, seek accountability, and do whatever is necessary. Get equipped at accountable2you.com.
A master called together a few young men of this generation and spoke to them, saying, "I gave your great-grandfathers a time of despair and poverty and global war. They were strong and victorious and built an empire greater than any other. But they were terrible fathers and raised entitled sons and daughters of rot who inherited everything through no courage of their own. To those rotten sons, your own grandfathers, I gave abundance and wealth and stability. But they pissed it all away on debauchery and sexual revolution, establishing many idols and slaughtering tens of millions of children in sacrifice to their appetites. One generation fought against the perpetrators of a great Holocaust. The next dishonored that victory with an even greater Holocaust of their own children. The children who did survive, your fathers, carried on the sexual descent of their parents into new madness and new disease, piercing and inking their skin like death-worshipping pagans as they did, establishing special days of pride to celebrate the debauch, slaughtering more children and castrating and poisoning others, claiming to be creators when they were destroyers, mutilating the young and calling it acceptance. All these generations I have judged, and am judging. Their madness now is only a taste of my wrath." The young men were afraid and asked the master why he had called them and why he was telling them these things. "Because it is now your turn. I am giving all of this chaos to you," he said. "Your inheritance is a world of crumbling false gods crowded with blind and mad worshippers. I am entrusting you with a world of empires built on cracked and heaving foundations. The time of your inheritance is near. You have only a little while to prepare yourselves. Seize this moment of chaos and build me a world of sanity and righteousness. When I return, I will judge what you have built for me. With so much rubble to work with, I expect great things." The master turned to leave, but the young men begged him to wait. "How can we do this?" they asked. "There are hundreds of millions of unbelievers in our nation alone and only a few of us." Their master answered, saying, "I am not a hard master. You will have the truth and wisdom if you desire it. And you may each choose one woman to help you. That should be enough. Go now and build New St. Andrews College. Carpe Chaos."
Hey y'all, welcome to CrossPolitic on the Fight Laugh Feast Network. Pastor Toby, Chuck Knox, I'm the Water Boy. It is good to be with you, and it's good. We got Joy back in the studio.
Yes,
Joy.
If you
she's
guys
regretting it
know
already.
what a Lutheran homemaker with a keyboard can do. You about to listen.
Yeah, she's got.
You about to hear it.
She's about to do some JL action
on the pride, on the LGBT world. It's a false flag, but I wonder, did she raise the Christian flag? That's what I want to know.
or the appeal to heaven flag.
Yeah,
that's the one that's really.
Don't
freaking
Lutherans
them out.
have a flag?
And
They got their own
Do
symbol.
Lutherans have a Christian flag?
I think so.
It's probably like a beer stein on it or something.
It is, totally. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 10 through 12, God tells of the gold in the land of Havilah, and that the gold of that land is good. Ever since the dawn of our father's world, gold has been universally recognized as true money and therefore the most reliable store of savings. CrossPolitic's corporate partner, Alps Precious Metals, enables their clients to protect their God-given hard-earned wealth from the serious financial problems that are upon us. ALPS provides the CrossPolitic family with the best strategies and solutions for investing in physical precious metals. As a result, you can enjoy a peace of mind that can be had with few other investments. So call James Hunter today at ALPS at 251-377-2197. That's 251-377-2197. Or visit their website at www.alpspng.com. That's alpspng.com.
That's a brave man.
You just give it out.
You put your cell phone number on
his phone number out. I know.
All right.
Hey, we're really grateful to have back with us Mrs. Joy Pullman. She's the executive editor of The Federalist, the author of several books, the mother of 6 kids, and perhaps the happiest wife in the country.
Wow.
Whoa.
That's a...
Whoa.
That's a...
You gotta talk to my
name
wife
it,
about
claim
that.
it.
I'm going to talk to my wife about that.
Joy, thanks for coming back on to discuss your new book, False Flag, Why Queer Politics Means the End of America.
Thank you so much for having me. And I will have to say that my husband was absolutely batting 1,000 when I was writing that new set of bios for the book. So it's his lucky year.
Yes.
He had to step up a little bit. That's all right.
He has been, yeah.
Praising his name in the gates. Go ahead, lady.
That's right.
So this is a topic, I mean, I think in many respects, a lot of these themes have been discussed a fair bit amongst Christians over the last number of years. I mean, since Obergefell, since Bostock, these major Supreme Court decisions, since the proliferation of these
trans culture,
the Pride Month and the Pride flag and all the rest of it. But I mean, are you finding that, well-meaning Christian people are still missing just how much damage queer politics is doing to our culture?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially in the Christian spectrum, it's more popular, even, among people who call themselves on the left, middle or center left politically. There's a lot of questions about the trans sort of thing, but there's really still not a lot of willingness to question and look back into the antecedents of how we got to the craziness. I think there's broad-based agreement across left and right, average folks, especially among Christians, that we are in a really crazy place in our culture. But I don't think, I think there's a lot more work to be done in thinking about, it's not just about what we're seeing, the transgender things come up, but it has as antecedents in, I argue feminism, in some big changes that have been made to our political system over the last 100 years. And that is something I surf in the book that I think a lot of people really are not ready to, or, not as well convinced about rethinking, for example, the relationships between men and women in ways that I think we really need to do to actually address, the kind of downstream problems such as the tranny nuts, the crazy stuff that people see and dislike.
So, we're watching people getting ready for the RNC, the Republican National Convention. Is it next week?
Next week.
And we've heard rumors. I don't know if it's happened or what happened, but they're talking about dropping definition of marriage.
It's already happened.
Oh, it is happened. Okay.
They took out traditional family in the party, platform, and so there's now genderless family going on in the Republican Party platform for the first time ever.
Wait.
No, but I got a process problem here, or process question. That was a committee. Doesn't it have to go before the whole convention to get voted on?
I think you may be right about that, but I also have, so for example, if we follow the pro-life, the ways that the Trump campaign is particularly, it's really been making these changes behind closed doors and then telling the delegates, vote it up or down.
Wow.
So as far as I can understand from the people, who have been part of this process for many years, they're saying, it's a different process. So I'm not sure how much chance the convention goers will have to amend those in the next week. But I could be wrong about that.
Lord Trump is the chair of the Republican Party. She's co-chair.
Stop. Don't say, Laura Trump.
Laura.
I thought you said Lord Trump.
No, Laura.
I did too.
You might have heard it right.
Don't say that, Gabe.
Well, he's acting like it.
So, Joy, if you were given the platform at the RNC,
yeah,
and you had 2 minutes to try to convince the Republican National Convention not to approve this, if there was some way we could not approve it,
and there was no red dot on your forehead.
Yeah. You're the bravest Lutheran mother of 6 ever. What do you say to the Republican National Convention to try to get them to change this?
Well, I actually think at this point that there is pretty much nothing that could be said. They're very well said about this. The establishment leadership of the Republican Party really doesn't want to revisit the sexual revolution in any way, shape, or form. You can see this from all kinds of things. So, for example, there even if you look at the life issues, the Trump Party, as well as all the Republican senators, are out there supporting in vitro fertilization, the creation of babies in test tubes, keeping them cryogenically frozen, indefinitely, which is an obviously affront to human life, and as well as tying into the fact that men and women are different, and both of us are required to create a family. So I don't think that just the sort of interest, the way that the Republican Party currently is, I don't think that anything I could say could change their mind. But I think, the best that one could do under that circumstance probably would just be to make the argument, hoping that it would be bearing fruit later on. I think usually people have to run into, face the consequences of their own ideas and have it slap them in the head really good and hard before, but many times, especially on issues like this, the ones where people have made some of their own choices, and it's hard to rethink that psychologically. So I think probably, nothing's going to change their minds, but a lot more pain and suffering. But I think you could lay the groundwork by saying something like, which I do in this book, right? Look, there are differences between a couple made out of a man and a woman and a couple made out of two men or two women. The things that those different separate groups of people do in the bedroom is completely different, right? You don't have the same body parts involved. So we can't use the same language to describe something that is obviously different. So I go, for example, in a section in the book, the Supreme Court, I say that they don't understand how sex works because, the Supreme Court is just like, again, everyone at the leadership of the Republican Party, pretty much all the heights of culture right now, they pretend like they accept the basically transgender premise that if you swap in a man for a woman in a marriage relationship, that the same thing can be occurring. And that's factually and logically false, right? Men have different body parts. I'm sorry to have to go to, first grade biology here, but men have different body parts than women. And so it's just impossible for those physical interactions to be the same. So I think we have to do a lot more talking just to take the people understand that men and women are different, that our bodies are different, and then we have to be drawing conclusions from those basic biological facts, and therefore using the same words to describe actually different behavior is lying. And it's the same kind of lie if you're calling a man a woman as if you are saying that swapping a man for a woman in a relationship results in the same kind of thing happening.
Joy, anybody who reads the Bible and then can look out into our culture could see the slippery slope forming a long time ago into kind of the sexual ethics we have now. If you were to kind of pick out, that needle in a haystack, what happened, 40 years ago that we might look at as some sort of, innocuous kind of, I grew up in a world where Friends was the leading sitcom. And there was, infidelity and sex and, it wasn't shown in the sitcom, but the kind of relationships that were there was already encouraging this kind of stuff. But we think of Friends as maybe like a tame sitcom now.
Yeah.
What was happening where we were, this is kind of innocuous, but it was devastating from the beginning. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I agree with that. And this probably isn't going to be super surprising to your listeners, but I think among evangelicals, it is still controversial. It's kind of frustrating to me that this is true, but it's still controversial to criticize feminism. Yeah. So in the book, I try to do a lot of work to show how, the sexual revolution is absolutely tied to communism. And communism isn't just a political movement, but it is a religious movement. It is an anti-Christian religious movement. So people who put their faith seriously and put it, atop everything else and say, I always have to go with my faith and with the Bible, even if it does things that I don't really like or, that I'm worried or anxious about. We always have to, as Christians, say, God, what you say is true, and I will obey and listen, even, if I'm not sure how this exactly is going to work. So I do think a lot across the Christian evangelical world, it's still controversial to criticize feminism. It's also, in my own church circles, there's not a lot of criticism of divorce. And I have to say, my pastor is very good about that, right? But the average, typical congregation that I'm used to, it's a touchy subject, right? Because, a lot of people have been affected by it. But in my book, I really do look at, I think I don't say this in the book, but I think it's true. There's, of course, been this criticism from the homosexual activists, right, that the heterosexuals ruined marriage before we got to it. I think there's some truth to that. I don't think the answer is wrecking it even more, but I do think, and I point out research to show that a lot of the LGBT identification among young people nowadays is absolutely related to the sexual chaos that's coming to them from having their parents not married, having their parents divorced, having that instability in the home, the lack of either or both parents available to the children to nurture them and provide them that sense of family and identity that children deserve from their parents. There's a lot of the weakening of the family ecosystem that the church has put up with and even endorsed, right? So frankly, I know a lot of pastors are scared to criticize women because, and in fact, this has been flipping. I just saw, a poll with Pew that shows actually the majority of faithful people in the pews post-COVID now are men, but it has been for many years majority female, right? So there's been this sensitivity about criticizing women or raising issues about the sins of women. And I think that has helped lead to this, if we're not talking about the sins of all people equally and bringing everybody to the cross and to the forgiveness that Jesus offers. And, then, we're not really, our churches aren't preaching the gospel, and that does have cultural effects that include, the families not being run in the way that God says they should be run, with the man as the head of the household and the wife, as a subordinate, assisting them, both on the same page, working together for the good of the kids. So we haven't had enough of that being preached in many of our churches. And I know that the resulting family instability is a major contributing factor to the dramatic increase in young people identifying as queer now.
Mic drop.
That's a pretty complete answer.
Mic drop right there. Yeah. Do you have a podcast or thinking about starting one? Does your church have a podcast feed for sermons? We need more of that. Then Dropwave.io is for you. Cancel culture is like walking on a thin glass bridge over the Grand Canyon. I'm just reading this. Every step you take could get you killed. I mean, canceled. Since the beginning of CrossPolitic has been working on being an anti-fragile, so no matter what happens, our content can still be delivered to your TV and to your podcast.
And your church's podcast, too.
That's right. The Water Boy and his friend Jeremy have been working on building a podcast hosting solution for rowdy platforms like CrossPolitic so that you can be confident that your podcast will never fall through that glass bridge. Dropwave.io offers seamless onboarding for shows that have been around for years, to easy-to-use solutions for starting your own podcast. Dropwave.io will track all your shows' downloads by city, state, and country, and it offers network and enterprise packages for solutions like the Fight Laugh Feast network. Free to speak, free to podcast, free to start your journey now at www.dropwave.io.
It's a great ad.
So, Joy, I'm not going to lie. Just listening to you, you haven't been very joyful. I'm a little bummed out right now. Part of it is because
she said the RNC is gone.
Yeah, well, that's okay. So I have like a list of questions here. I just want to throw them all out at you, let you pick one, but I'm not going to do that. As I was going through your book and I was assessing kind of what you were saying, and then Gabe, I think it was Pastor Toby, asked about the RNC, and it seems like it's done. And so I'm wondering, when you wrote your book, who did you write your book for? Because I think overall you have to look at America in the same sort of context that you're looking at the RNC and saying, we're looking at what you've written, your chapters here. It looks like we've been fully infiltrated by DEI, sexual ethics that aren't originally ours. And looking at chapter 3, it's been going on for over 100 years now, this whole transition. What's the prognosis of where we're at right now?
Well, that's everyone wants to know that answer, and I'm not God, so I can't tell you for sure, but I can give you my best guess.
Yeah.
Which is probably what you're really asking for. I don't really know, my conclusion, as a person who is in the public square a lot in the work that I do outside of my family and home, I think that, it's my job to be faithful and to use all of my abilities and talents that God's given me to the utmost, no matter what the outcome is, right? He's given me responsibilities and abilities, and I should be, a faithful servant, and the outcome is in the hand of the Lord. So I really believe that, and so I think all of us should be trusting in God and not in the princess. That's not only Bible verse, that's one of our famous hymns that always comes back to my mind and in my work every day, right? Don't put your trust in those princes. They're mortal. They're a bunch of conniving liars. And that's always been true from the fall. So, I don't think we can trust the RNC or any politician, but I do think they can be, God does speak clearly. The heart of the king is in his hand. He can move all of the big power players like he did Pharaoh, pieces of chess on a chessboard. He's in complete sovereign control. So the first thing I think, people need to do is be working and praying, right? We need to do a lot of praying for our country. Yeah. And especially, one of the prayers I keep coming back to as a mother is, Lord, I want my children to be able to continue to have freedom to worship you freely. And, it is something that we're still allowed to do in this country. And I think it is under threat. There's threats that are closing in. But I'm praying that God will allow us to continue to do that in this country. It's maybe the most important thing to me, that I and my children can continue to worship freely, something that was threatened during the lockdown time and became very real and not a distant future sort of thing, given that recent history that we have. So I guess there's a lot of things that could happen. I mean, I do think that there's opportunities for kind of stanching the tide. I don't think all policy is lost, but I don't think that people should look to government as if it's going to be their savior. Even if, say, President Trump gets elected and gets a Republican Congress, we saw what happened last time. The Republican Congress fought with him most of the time. He was stymied by the deep state, et cetera, right? I just don't think it is a Christian view to think that the prince is going to, completely solve everything or save you. Only God can do that. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think, the Bible doesn't tell us, exactly what kind of suffering we will go to, but it says when we do suffer that Jesus will be there and he will give us the words to say. And we have to put our hope in him and continue to be as faithful as we can, no matter what comes up.
Can we talk a little bit about chapter 3, where you talk about
you're not like a Lutheran preacher, like a liberal Lutheran preacher or something like that?
There was nothing liberal about what she said.
We don't do women preachers in my denomination.
She said, I'm not Presbyterian. Sorry. I want to talk about chapter 3 a little bit, Joy, because you talk about this 100-year regime change. And you basically start saying that's where in this era is where we lost the natural rights versus the group rights that we currently have. What's the difference? How do we lose it? And when did it start 100 years ago?
Well, that's a question that takes up about a third of my book, so I'll try to give the short answer here. So I basically talk about the sexual identity rights as a regime change inside the United States. And the reason I do that is I think that it answers a little bit of your previous question, because I want the readers to understand just what the stakes are of the current, situation. This isn't just kind of the thing that is likely to blow over. This is an existential challenge to the country. So I argue that basically since the time of Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they basically planted the seeds for a competing constitution inside the United States. A lot of scholars have talked about this, especially, if folks are kind of, intellectual, philosophical on the right, they might read the Claremont Review of books. People like Christopher Caldwell, right? Bill Vigelli over there. They've written a lot about this, and I've read some of their books. But they, say since the progressive era, we've had both the original Constitution given to us by our founders that secures our natural rights, but then we've also had this living Constitution that basically is a tyrannical regime because it rules through the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is basically the definition of tyranny because it unites the powers of government that our founders wanted separated. It unites the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. So, for example, administrative agencies, this has been challenged recently with the Supreme Court's decision on something called Chevron deference. But the way that things, typically have gone over the last century is an executive agency gets to essentially pass a law, without any input from any elected representative, and they get, if and then they assess if someone has broken the law that they passed without an act of Congress, and they, punish people for that within their own kind of system of non-constitutional courts, right? And so if someone wanted to fight any of that, he better have multiple millions of dollars to be able to get through that bureaucrat process and finally move his case to the real Article 3 courts outside of the administrative agencies. So our founders called the uniting of those three powers with one entity a tyranny, right? And so we've had those two competing systems of government, kind of, the new living constitution layered atop of the old, the traditional, the promise of the Constitution, original one, and the Bill of Rights for, about 100 years now, with the living Constitution growing and gaining a lot more power. And so I argue, and again, I'm just quoting people who are smarter than me, but the argument is that now that second system of government may be big enough to have swallowed the first system of government. So that, do you really have your natural rights if you have to have multiple millions of dollars to defend them in court against your own government, who can bankrupt you before you ever even get to a real constitutional court to have your claim heard? Yeah. I argue that I don't think we really do have our natural rights if it's not, already secured to us without bankrupting us. So you have to be rich to have your rights. So basically, the point that we're at is we may have, I think it could be reversible, right? Because, for example, there's a big, not only, was Chevron deference overturned by the Supreme Court, which is a really big decision. We'll have to kind of see how it plays out, if there's some reversal of the tyrannical use of these administrative agencies, as well as, if smart people get into executive positions and legislatures, not just at the federal level, but at the state level, they can dismantle a lot of this anti-constitutional bureaucracy that uses its bureaucratic power to push everybody into their sexual revolution and state. So, for example, the hate speech policies, the pro-num policies, the anti-conscience rights, the shutting down of churches during COVID, none of that was done through, laws passed by duly elected representatives. It was all done through these agencies that just, legislated on their own. Right. So if you restrict those agencies, that extra constitutional system of government, that's really, I think, the ticket to restoring as much of our constitutional freedoms that we are owed in this country as possible.
So if Trump is elected and he asks you which agency should he go after first, he has to choose one, which one would you go after?
Oh, that's a good question. For me, I would go after the national security blob first, probably. But I would, so I've thought about this a little bit just because of my job. So I'd probably start with the national security blob because they're the scariest. The spooks are, using their secret power basically to circumvent elected oversight of them, which basically puts you in a military dictatorship position, right? Yep. If you don't have elected civilian oversight of our military capabilities. So that's probably where I would start. But I also think that, my strategy, if I were in a fantasy world, somehow advising a president, I would actually argue that there should be a massive reorganization of all the federal bureaucracy. And as a part of that reorganization, you should eliminate as much of it as possible.
Yeah. Here.
Yeah. So go ahead, Gabe. I'm sorry. I'm just hogging the whole.
But I want to point out also that, that this canon should be done at the state level.
Yeah.
Because I think, the federal level is it's much harder to influence. You really have to have control of Congress to do that kind of thing. The president could do some of it, but he, really needs Congress. And Congress is, frankly, a pile of trash. It's really in a mess state. And it has an 8% approval rating for a reason, right? I think that's legit. But I also think that a lot, states could start paying attention to this. They could be debureaucratizing, and it's a lot easier to be able to get, your hands on the levers of power within a state. And I do think that states should, Ron DeSantis really stuck his foot in his mouth with his campaign against President Trump. But I think that doesn't negate the fact that he has presented a very good model that other states should be following and kind of paving the way and learning how to use the tricks of bureaucracy against itself, and how little, how much of self-government you can give back to the people and develop their own ability to govern themselves again. Yeah. That's something that should be also tried out at the state level. And that's way more doable, I think.
So then if you're a governor, in order to follow kind of what you said, what you would do at the federal level, as a governor, would you say embolden the sheriff's office to protect its people against federal overreach? Is that something you would do there first and then go after the DEI stuff?
I would do all of the above. I think everything needs to be done as quickly as possible. We're really in a bad state and we don't have much time.
What's the role? Or
More joy, please.
What do you think the role
real,
or the
though.
conversation Christian nationalism has in all this? Are you sympathetic? Are you Christian nationalist? Where do you stand on that?
Well, the problem for me with the label is that I think it means different things to different people, and I also, I am pro Christians having power for the sake of the people, that they would be ruling over. I want more Christians to be elected to office, but I don't want Christians like Mike Johnson to be wielding power, right? I don't want people who are going to fold, like a cheap suit at any, thing and like pretend that they, excuse their refusal to use the authority of their office for the benefit of the people under them, and cover that up, in a really offensive way by saying, yes, but I pray.
Yeah.
As a Christian, I find that super offensive, right? To kind of use God to cover up your lack of leadership with the authority He's given you. But I would love to have more, bold men taking the places, because we still, I still think we have, especially, like I said, the local and the state level, 20 to 25% of people vote in their primary elections, right? And I know, even in my own town, if you switch a couple hundred votes, you can control the, makeup of your county council, of your city council. So that's an absolutely doable thing for a couple dozen people walking the streets of their own town. So I've seen that strategy. It's still successful. And I think that people really absolutely should be. I think the fact, so I like to, as someone who's a media critic, part of my job is media criticism. I think I notice when people on the left freak out about something because it seems that they are often wiser than, people on the right and Christians. Like they seem to know intuitively what would be much more dangerous to them. So, for example, I think the demonization of, men is absolutely because, I think the left is rightly scared of men, because when they take proper authority and act, judicially on behalf of those they serve, they are a serious threat. And in the same way, I think, Christians who seek positions of power for godly purposes are perhaps the top threat, to the continued encroachment of totalitarianism in the United States. And that's why, therefore, they're a top target. And they, the Christian nationalism sort of thing's been used as a slur.
If there's we're almost up here, but why should a pastor or a leader buy this book? Like, what are you trying to map out for them? What do you want them to walk away with that changes their view about the fight that's before us?
Well, my goal in writing it really was to solidify people's understanding of what is happening, so they don't, like I said earlier, I don't want people to. I want people to understand how existential this is, the fact that we are really at an inflection point in our history. I think a lot of people are aware of that. A lot of people have talked about that we're in an apocalyptic moment. And I don't mean that in like a weird end timesy sort of way. I just mean it kind of in the sense that we've been through a very revealing and eye-opening decade, haven't we?
Yeah.
And it seems to be kind of the theme of what's going on. So in that same vein, I aim for my book to shore up the courage and the knowledge of people who have ears to hear, so that they can have their loins girded for the fight that we must wage ahead on behalf of our kids and on behalf of our country, if we want to continue to have freedom to worship and to speak and to basically not be slaves continue for us and for our children and grandchildren.
There's a couple books that I think about that I want my kids to read, kind of as a history book of our time. Mm-hmm. I think of Steve Deace's, is it The Fourth Reich? Mm-hmm. Where he interviews all these people during COVID.
Yeah.
I want my kids to, when they get old enough, to read that, because that's firsthand accounts of the tyranny under COVID. Yeah. I think False Flag is one of those books as my kids get older that they can kind of see.
Here's what happened.
Here's what happened.
Here's how we got here.
That's right. And so those two books kind of stick out to me as like, man, one of my.
Joy, I want to ask, maybe this last one.
Joy, how much time do you have? Are we pushing our limit on your time?
I have a hard out at 2:30.
Okay. You've described already, and I know it's in your book, but you talk about how sort of the woke thing is a really a religious movement. It's you said communism is an anti-Christian movement. You call chapter 7 is titled woke theocracy.
That's what I wanted to talk to her about.
I guess I don't know what your question is, Knox, but maybe my broad question is sort of what difference does it make for people to understand that this is a religious movement, not just a political?
Yes, I think one of the greatest deceptions for Americans for the past 100 years has been that there's such a thing as secularism and that it's possible to be religiously neutral.
Yeah, facts.
I don't actually think that it's possible to be religiously neutral. And I think, frankly, that Satan has used that to erase the faith of many people, not only in the United States, but across the globe. And I also think this continues, people who think that it is safe to put their Christian kids in public schools, because they have this idea that, you can be neutral on religion. I mean, Jesus doesn't say that that's the case. He says, either you're for me or you're against me. Yeah. He doesn't talk about, religiously neutral spaces, and he says, bring the children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So, my history in politics, I've been an education reporter for almost 20 years. So I thought it was very important to look at, I've developed that thought about that secularism actually isn't a non-religion. It's its own religion because it functions as a religion. It displaces Christianity. It is hostile to Christianity, and it's very, very clever in selling to Christians, getting them to shut up and be quiet and go to sleep because they believe that it might be neutral to them when it's absolutely not. Yeah. So I think it is basically, frankly, a tool used of the devil to lure people into sleep, to ignore the fact, that it steals people's faith away from them. Which obviously, if you're a Christian, you should never want to happen. We want more faith, not less faith. So I think that that's a lot more obvious with communism because communism, has very clear religious commitments. And I found the same. And so in the book, I guess a couple of ways that I come into the religious aspect of this. The first one just is talking about, what people variously call wokeism, identity politics, cultural Marxism. It functions in people's lives as a religion. So I found out just, being as a reporter, I noticed that there were reports in secular places like the Washington Post of a resurgence in actual pagan religions such as Wicca, observance of Wicca, right? So praying to spirits, earth spirits, obviously as Christians, we know those are demons, yeah. Right? So people are increasingly praying to demons. And what's the largest motivator, the Washington Post says, in people doing that? It's their queer identity, right? So people who already identify as queer, or some kind of, sexual nonconformist, they are substituting, they're adopting the religion, pagan religions, and increasingly in the United States. Very interesting. And then I also found, so there's one of these top anti-religious Christian, anti-Christian hate organizations called the Satanic Temple, that they also basically, their function is to go and erase Christianity from the public square everywhere possible. Right. So I don't know if they're formally tied, but they're at least, it's the same kind of impulse, related to, in Idaho with the putting up of the Satan statue in the state legislature, right? The pretense that, the founders ever meant anything but Christianity to be the dominant religion of the United States, as if, Satanism is somehow equal or can be in the United States, right. To Christianity, which is the founding religion of the country. But the Satanic Temple, according to its adherents, is a largely LGBT organization. They do LGBT behaviors as part of their religious rites. And again, that's a growing organization with chapters across the country. People who are part of it say it's almost, completely, formed. Its members are largely queer people. So I was put in this position of when I was looking into this, looking at the religious connections, I just was coming into it from my, communism and secularism function as religions. They are religious replacements and they're competing religions to Christianity. When someone adopts either one of them, it displaces their faith. It takes away their Christianity. So obviously it's a substitute faith that functions as a religion. But then when I started to look at it more, I started to see that these people, the queer people, including queer theorists, academics, as well as, pop artists, people like the rapper Lil Nas X, and Sam Smith, they were overtly tying their anti-heterosexual practices, their sexual deviancy to, they were saying that it was an act of worship to Lucifer. Yeah. So I was put in this, and I quote this in the book, so clearly I'm a Christian, right? So we've talked about that, but most of my work, I really don't talk about my faith that much. And so I was put in a very odd position while writing that chapter of seeing that people who hate Jesus Christ were more explicit and more actually biblically direct about the connections between Satan worship and obeying Satan and queer sexuality than I typically see Christians be. Yeah. And I thought, boy, for me, that was a kick in the pants. Maybe I need to I shouldn't be that Satanists talk in more biblical language and terms than I do, and that people of faith do, that Christians do. So for me, it was a little bit freeing and emboldening to say, hey, look, they don't get to have a monopoly to talk about religion and religious aspects. Absolutely, it's time for, I think, me to be starting to talk more about spiritual matters. And I've seen, more of that being creeping into the cultural conversation on some of the alternative kind of podcasts, most notable perhaps Tucker Carlson, some of his guests, they broached that subject. They've talked about, there seems to be something spiritual underlaying all of the politics. And I have very long thought that the culture war it's not just a culture war, it's a spiritual war. Yeah. And I think Christians really need to understand that. We don't wrestle with flesh and blood. We're wrestling with princes and principalities here.
Yes.
And so in the last chapter of the book, I really say that, if you're a Christian, you should be taking up the weapons of spiritual warfare to fight against, darkness, demons controlling our country and being in the halls of power. We don't want to live under demons. No. We want to live under righteousness.
Amen.
I mean, it's amazing how we've been talking about this since COVID, how God, in many respects, has sort of lowered the bar. Like, in COVID, the way to be a successful church was open.
Seriously.
Like preach the gospel, be open. And it's like, and we're at the point where it's like, if you believe that boys are boys and girls are girls, and that one man and one woman, that's a married couple, that only those kind of people can have babies. Like, it's like real, like 1 + 1 is 2 kind of stuff. Yeah. It's like winning, and Joy says, let's not have our country run by demons. Yeah, it's like okay, yeah, let's do that. Even as you're talking though, I was thinking, I mean, it's right there. I mean, what you're saying is right in the Bible. Romans 1 in particular, it says that it's when people have rejected worshiping and glorifying the Creator, and instead worship and glorify creation. So that's worship. Yep. That they're worshiping creation. They're praying to the earth goddess, which is, all the demons of nature, whatever. God, their foolish hearts are darkened, and God gives them over to sodomy. God gives them over to homosexuality. God gives them over to these unnatural desires. Yeah. I mean, it's right there. This pagan worship goes together with pagan sexuality. Yeah. Yep. And frequently in liberal churches that are in the process of apostatizing and turning away from God, they'll frequently make the argument, well, in the Old Testament, sodomy, it means ritual sodomy. It means sodomy connected to the worship of pagan gods. Yeah. And I'm like, yes.
Okay.
But they somehow think, but we're talking about something different. In the ancient world, it was tied to paganism, but here in the modern world, enlightened world, we're talking about, committed homosexual, whatever. And you're like, no, those are the rituals of paganism.
Yes, that's right.
Those are the rituals of paganism. And so when you start doing those rituals, you're in the process of returning to that paganism. Thank you for underlining that, Joy, and thank you for your book, False Flag. Yeah. Everybody go out and buy it now, and buy a few for your kids and your grandkids.
Joy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. You're always welcome back here on CrossPolitic. Thank you so much. If you're single,
thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Yes. Yeah. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Even Joy agrees with me on that. Until next time, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is CrossPolitic.